This video brought to you by War Thunder. So if you've been around for a while, you know that when the TF2 team nerfed an overpowered weapon, they had a tendency to kinda go overboard. I mean, not always, but if something was getting nerfed, there was a solid chance that it would just be gutted. Like, the original Enforcer was so dumb, basically just a direct upgrade. Well, with the Dead Ringer, it was literally a direct upgrade. And at first they kinda gave it this nothing nerf that barely changed anything, and then they changed it so the damage bonus went from only applying when undisguised to only applying when disguised, which severely limits how often that even comes into play. I mean, the current version isn't horrible, but it's really not good. Removing the stun from the Sandman was good. It's not a mechanic that ever belonged in TF2, and I'm glad they were willing to remove it, but without any other kind of new gimmick added, it just kind of left the Sandman feeling hollow, and you really don't want to have to deal with that passive health loss just for equipping it. The Whirlpool Caper was tweaked a few times, but the current version would not be nearly as bad if it wasn't the slowest deploying weapon in the game. Some deploy penalty is probably fine, but 100% is not necessary. The reserve shooter went from being way better on Pyro than Soldier to barely being worth equipping on Pyro. In the TF2 beta, they tested nerfing the shortstop's reload by 20%, but ended up doing it by 50% when bringing it into the main game, for some reason. I think nerfing the radius on the Dragon's Furious projectile was fine, but they really did not need to make it so the damage bonus was only given if the fireball's center made contact with the target's hitbox. And that one specifically is maybe one of my least favorite nerfs ever, because not only was it unnecessary, but it makes the stats a lie sometimes. You're supposed to deal 300% damage against burning targets, but sometimes you don't. And that's not to say those weapons are necessarily outright bad in their current state, though maybe some of them are, but the point is they went too far when nerfing them. Now, luckily, some weapons were able to crawl their way back from being nerfed into the ground. The Tomislav went from an insane 75% faster spin-up, to a super good 40%, to an almost unnoticeable 10%, then back up to 20%, and they also gave it an accuracy bonus. I think the current Tomislav has a lot of missed potential, but it's good, at least. The Tide Turner was pretty much the ultimate shield when it came out, and practically invalidated the existence of the charger target in the splitted screen. So, because of that, they reduced the amount of charge gained on kill, and also made it so taking damage depleted your charge faster. And I think that's actually a pretty good and fitting downside for the Tide Turner, except for that they made it so the ratio was 3 to 1, so it would only take about 33 damage to stop you in your tracks. And that kinda made the Tide Turner not very good. But when they made that ratio 1 to 1, it made the Tide Turner really good again, and then they nerfed it again. And I still do think the second nerf was maybe a little bit overboard, but the Tide Turner is good. And according to this poll, it is the most popular shield, so that's worth something. The Extinguisher was nerfed a few times, mainly because of the Degreaser, which isn't really fair. But it did eventually result in the pretty good, though maybe slightly overcomplicated version we have now. And I could come up with plenty more examples for either of those categories, but I think occasionally, when a weapon is forced to go through so many iterations, it can sometimes end up like a bit of a mishmash of stats. Where instead of fully reverting a bad change or removing a fundamentally flawed idea, they might decide to just keep working off of what they have. Like for the shortstop, instead of just buffing the reload speed a little bit to be somewhere in between the original and the current speed, they decided it would be better to give it a healing bonus and increased knockback for some reason. And then they removed the healing bonus and replaced it with a shove that not a single person asked for. This shove required brand new animations and a new voice line, and I don't know why it was added. Why does the shortstop have a shove? I don't know. You also have the Natasha, a weapon built around the fundamentally terrible concept of slowing people down. It's just not fun, and you can't really make it fun. They nerfed it a lot from its original version, and then just slapped on a few different stats after that. Even the Short Circuit, which is certainly a very strong weapon in its current form, has that primary fire that's like this weird vestigial remnant from a long-gone version. It really doesn't have a reason to be there. But bad nerfs isn't what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to talk about good nerfs. But before we do, let's talk about this video's sponsor instead. War. Huh. What is it good for? Making games about. That's right, we're brought to you by War Thunder, the most comprehensive, free-to-play, cross-platform MMO military game out there. In this game, you can take command of thousands of different tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships from different countries and different time periods. And these vehicles are super detailed, with realistic graphics and authentic sound effects. And one of my favorite parts is how every vehicle is intricately modeled down to the individual components, like engines, fuel tanks, weapons, and crew. And these are all susceptible to damage or disabling from enemy fire, and different types of armor, shells, and missiles behave like their real-world counterparts. So if you're a fan of military history and want to join a worldwide community of over 95 million players, then this is the game for you. They say war never changes, but War Thunder does, and you can play it for free on PC, mobile, PlayStation, and Xbox. Not only that, but signing up with my link in the description and the pinned comment will give new and returning PC and console players who haven't played in the last 6 months a massive bonus pack that includes premium vehicles, 100,000 Silver Lions, and 7 days of premium accounts. But it is only available for a limited time, so hurry up and check it out. Alright, so a weapon being fun to fight, or at least not horribly obnoxious to fight, is just as important as being fun to use. Possibly even more so. And it is important to know when something needs a nerf or some tweaking. I'm usually pretty critical of how much Heavy has been given the short end of the stick when it comes to balancing, but when he was able to heal off of his own drop sandwiches, that was clearly too much. You could just throw it down and instantly receive 150 health. And when it was like that, basically nobody ever took the time to actually do the eating animation, because it was always safer and faster to just eat it off the ground, if not a little bit unsanitary. But even after they made it so that picking up your own drop sandwich just refilled the bar, the sandwich remained one of the best weapons in the game. That was a good nerf. When they announced ahead of time that the Rescue Ranger was going to start requiring metal for its bolts to repair buildings, I remember some people freaking out and saying it was going to ruin the weapon. And of course it didn't. I mean, it still repairs more efficiently than the wrench. But looking back, it was kind of questionable to ever have a ranged weapon provide free healing for your buildings. So that's another good nerf. Back when they split the equalizer into 2 weapons, it was immediately clear that the escape plan was way better, so they added the mark for death downside to it. And at the time, I basically thought they killed the weapon. I thought that was going too far. But the escape plan remained incredibly useful. And you know, I could keep going. There have definitely been some good nerfs, but I think the worst ones just tend to stick out more in our minds because of how harsh they tended to be. Though for this video, I mainly wanted to highlight what was, in my opinion, the best handled nerf to a very annoying weapon. The Gunslinger. I mean, if you really want to, you could debate on whether or not the original Gunslinger was overpowered or just simply super obnoxious. But personally, I think for what it was kind of overpowered. I mean, obviously, mini-sentries were never meant to replace level 3s, and they never did. Mini-sentries are really just their own thing that serve their own purpose. Which is why I always found it odd that they were listed as a downside on the Gunslinger. They're the main reason you're using that weapon to begin with. I mean, it really should be a neutral stat, because it's not like minis are just a direct downgrade to level 1s. According to the original Engineer Update page, mini-sentries deal half damage. Which is true, but they also fire 25% faster than level 1s. Which means that your DPS is reduced by about a third and not half. But what's not listed here is that they also turn a lot faster, which makes it harder to avoid getting hit. They also deal a lot less knockback, which might be good or bad depending on the situation. They also have less health, and they're also mini. They're smaller, so they are harder to hit. But what really made minis so annoying to deal with were these 3 things. The 100 metal cost, which is still the same as today, the 4 times faster building speed, and that they deployed with full health. That meant that the moment you plopped one down, it was instantly at 100 health. And to make things worse, for a while there was even a bug that would allow it to heal itself during the construction process. So that's not fun. And there was also that funny bug where you could make level 3 minis, but that's unrelated. And just on the topic of Gunslinger bugs, for a long time, when you were placing a mini, it showed a reduced range. Like the area where the mini could see was smaller than that of a normal sentry. But it never actually was. Despite what it showed, it always saw as far as a normal sentry. And at the time, this led a lot of us to believe that minis were intended to have a reduced range. But when they finally fixed it, they just fixed it showing a reduced distance instead. But now we're getting a little off topic. And maybe just hearing it described, it doesn't sound like much, but when you have a sentry that's fully armed in under 3 seconds, and starts at full health the moment it begins constructing, that gets irritating pretty fast. Just think about this general combat scenario. As soon as the engineer places it down, it's going to take you 2 rockets unless you're using the direct hit. And like clockwork, you can be assured that the moment that mini goes down, the engineer is already placing another one that also starts with 100 health and also builds in 2.9 seconds. And while you're dealing with those, the engineer is free to shoot you himself or run away to safety. It was the absolutely incredible spammability of minis that really made them frustrating to fight. Even if you weren't killed by it, you probably took some damage, you definitely used some ammo, and more than likely there was another one waiting for you a few seconds later. And that isn't to say the current Gunslinger doesn't have any of these aspects. Right now, once the mini-sentry is actually built, it's basically identical to the original version. In fact, it's actually better. Originally, you could not repair mini-sentries. They were really, truly just disposable. But ever since the gunmetal update, you can. And while it's often not worth it to bother to repair them, it can come in handy sometimes, and people usually don't expect it, which can lead to minis tanking a lot more damage than people anticipate. And while the Gunslinger had a few tweaks before then, including that time they replaced the no random crits downside with a 25% melee damage penalty for 1 day, it was that gunmetal update that really overhauled the Gunslinger into what we know it as today. In fact, it hasn't been changed since. And in that update, they reduced the base build speed of minis, they made it so they start at 50% health instead of 100%, and they made it so that the scraps from mini-sentries no longer give metal. However, to compensate for this, you could now repair minis, and minis could now be wrench construction boosted. So before this, minis always had a set build speed. About 2.9 seconds when you plopped one down, or about 1.5 seconds when you picked it up and redeployed it. Whether or not you actually punched it with the Gunslinger made no difference. And now, instead of building at about a quarter of the speed of a level 1, they build in about 40% of the time on their own. But if you do actually take the time to punch them, they'll build even faster than before. Only slightly, but still. This was a pretty simple, but genius change that made mini sentries a lot less spammable, but also more engaging to use. Like, if we're being honest, originally there wasn't a whole lot of strategy involved on when, how, or where you placed your sentries. You just threw them down. If an enemy's chasing you, you throw down another one. Keep doing it. But currently, they aren't nearly as much of an immediate roadblock to enemies as soon as you place them down. If you want your mini to build really fast and gain health faster, you actually have to hang around for a little bit to punch them, which makes you more vulnerable to being attacked yourself. Previously, there was literally no reason to stay by the side of your mini once you placed it. And you can still just place them and move on. That's still a totally legitimate option. It's just not nearly as effective or obnoxious as it was before. And if you do want them to build really fast and start at 100 health, you can just build one first and then move it, which I do find myself doing occasionally. Really, the only change that I think went a little bit overboard was making it so that mini sentry gibs don't provide you any metal at all. Originally, they could give you 28 metal, which is about, a quarter of the way to making a new mini. So you could just scoop that up and it would help you with placing more. And I think you could definitely make the case for reducing the amount of metal further, below 28, but I really don't like how this is the one building that's the exception to the rule when it comes to getting metal from scraps. I mean, everything else does it, I feel like this should too, even if it's just a little bit. In fact, that's probably the only change I would make to the Gunslinger, aside from general bug fixes and stuff. And what I think they really got right with the changes to the Gunslinger were pinpointing exactly what made it too good and addressing that, while also buffing it in other ways to compensate. Nobody would say that gunmetal didn't nerf the Gunslinger overall. It is definitely weaker overall than it was. But they didn't go overboard with the nerfs, and the buffs it was given at the same time prevented it from just becoming a shell of its former self. And those buffs also complemented and worked off of the nerfs, which oftentimes is a good way to do it. Now, of course, there are also times when just straight nerfing weapon is justified. One of the other Engineer Update weapons, the Wrangler, was nerfed 3 times, and it is still overpowered. They reduced its accuracy at long range, they added more fall-off outside the sentry's normal range, and finally, they decided to address the actual problem by reducing the repair rate by 66% when the shield is active. Like those first 2 changes, I don't even feel like were super necessary. The shield has always been the problem with the Wrangler. It's not even the fact that it has a shield for a good reason. It's the fact that it absorbs 66% of damage taken. If you pull out the Wrangler, your mini sentry will instantly become as tanky as a heavy. It has more resistance than the Fist of Steel had at its peak. A level 3 effectively has 648 health, and even more against miniguns. I don't know how they came to the conclusion that the resistance needed to be that high. And the funny thing is, I think reducing the repair rate was also a good nerf. But that should have come on top of reducing the shield's power. Honestly, I feel like 33% would probably be plenty. And even though both needed to be changed, the Gunslinger and the Wrangler suffered from different problems. It's like the Gunslinger was so annoying that it made it seem overpowered, where the Wrangler was so overpowered that it became annoying. On paper, the Wrangler should definitely be the easier fix. And given the TF2 team's somewhat spotty record on nerfing weapons, I'm kinda surprised the Gunslinger made it out as good as it did. It's a great example of a weapon going from arguably overpowered, and pretty universally regarded as irritating to fight, to possibly one of the best balanced weapons in the game. I consider the Gunslinger to be a pretty perfect weapon, especially for one that somewhat radically changes how Engineer plays. I mean, sure, maybe some scouts will complain sometimes, and it might be slightly annoying on something like Hightower or whatever, but if you played TF2 before the gunmetal update, you know how hated this thing was by a lot of people. I mean, even for a while after their nerf, minis still kind of kept their bad reputation, but that has definitely faded away. It's hard to break that reputation initially, but eventually people forget. They get used to the new version, and also new people start playing who don't have that preconception. And I still hold out some hope that we will see more balance changes in the future. But for the Gunslinger, I think it's just fine where it is. That's one they got right. So thanks for watching, and of course a big thanks again to this video's sponsor, War Thunder, which you can play for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and mobile. And for a limited time, that link in the description in the pinned comment will get new and returning players who haven't played in the last 6 months a massive bonus pack across PC and consoles, including multiple premium vehicles and other goodies. So that sounds pretty cool. Go find out. And lastly, of course, a special thanks to our patrons like Varric, Captain Forex, Egox, Colonel, Polyvinegar, Copernicus, Kelso the Pirate, Pillsman's Fox, Some Crazy Idiot, Ozond, Evil Toaster, Salt God, Lavi, Taupe, Time Consuming, Man344, Nolan46, and Melodici.